Joining me to take a look through the papers is Albie Amankona, political commentator and the co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism. Very good morning to you, Albie.
Good morning, Rosie.
How are you doing?
Yes, very well. How are you?
First thing on a Monday morning. So this story, at the end of last year, there were so many grotesque pictures, endless allegations of the water companies that were pumping and spilling sewage into rivers and seas. And the government said they were going to act. Why might it be that the water firms are spared these charges?
Well, first of all, Rosie, if people thought it was going to be a quiet week in politics this week with it being recess, they were completely wrong. So this story in the Times is about fines that the former Environment Secretary, Ronald Jayawardena, was going to increase. So basically, these were fines that were going to be increased from, I think, around 25 million pounds to 250 million pounds for the most offensive water companies dumping sewage in our seas and our rivers across the country. Now, since Ronald Jayawardena, who was the Environment Secretary under Liz Truss, got sacked when Rishi Sunak came into power, a new Environment Secretary now has the job, Therese Coffey, another key Liz Truss ally, and she's saying that she actually thinks that increasing the fines of £250 million could backfire because it could actually put off investors wanting to give loans to water companies to actually clean up the messes that they start in the first place. I think it's important to note, actually, which is tucked away in the article, that actually the Environment Agency has never used its civil powers, which were granted in 2010, to actually fine companies. So Therese Coffey, the new Environment Secretary, wants to look at how they can be reformed to deter pollution more effectively.
Yeah, I mean, well, DEFRA insists that the biggest penalties are still on the table. What is the best course of action? Because if it looks like they're not going to push through with the fines, what ultimately is going to stop them?
Well, look, ultimately, it doesn't sound like the fines are being used as they currently are. So I think it's probably right that Therese Coffey actually looks into the mechanisms and the reasons why the fines aren't being applied at the moment, so that they can actually be used, rather than just grabbing a headline by saying, well, we're going to fine these companies £250 million when they dump water in our seas, in our rivers, when actually skirting around the fact that we're not currently using the fining powers that we have at the moment. So actually, despite the headline, I think this is probably the right move from Therese Coffey.
OK, let's talk about spending, shall we? 5-star hotels, VIP airport lounges, flowers, gifts from Fortnum & Mason. We could be talking about a very indulgent Valentine's Day tomorrow.
If only.
But we're not. This is Labour condemning what they're describing a catalogue of waste on government credit cards. Spending on the credit cards has gone up significantly ever since sort of some of the controls that were put in around the pandemic were loosened. And it's revealed that, perhaps some of the spending's been more than indulgent.
So government spending on government credit cards has actually gone up 70% by 2010. Of course, 2010 was when the Conservatives and the Lib Dems came into power. It was a time of austerity. It was a time of, really bringing in government spending so that we could cut down our debt after the 2008 financial crash. But whilst this was happening, of course, the government spending on credit cards has gone up 70% by 2010, 150 million on government procurement cards in 2021 alone. Now, what we're hearing from specific government departments, notably the Foreign Office, which actually uses these cards a lot, is they say that no country or government of whatever party thinks that serious diplomacy is free. When we return the often generous hospitality received from others, we have to offer it to them. And it's done to enhance and promote British interests. But of course, this is not a good story for the government at a time of a cost of living crisis. This is a freedom of information request that Labour have asked for, so they have exposed this information. And I think it just adds to this whole attitude of the government is behaving in one way and the people are being asked to do another thing.
I mean, The Guardian have enjoyed sort of plucking out some of the more, you could say, ridiculous amounts spent on things. Haven't we learned from Wallpapergate, you might think, because Rishi Sunak's Treasury Department spent over £3,000 on photographs to hang on the walls when he was Chancellor, £4,500 on hotel rooms in Venice. These are own goals, aren't they?
They are own goals, but I think with the hotel rooms in Venice, I mean, we wouldn't necessarily expect the British Chancellor of the Exchequer to be staying in a travel lodge or a Premier Inn when they're doing official government business in Venice. So that one probably didn't annoy me so much.
Which ones did?
I think the pictures, spending £3 grand on some pictures to hang in the Treasury, seems like a pretty flagrant misuse of public money. I think it's perfectly understandable that if you're taking out the US ambassador for dinner, you're not going to take them to McDonald's. You might want to take them to the Savoy. But these things which seem actually not to really benefit the British people or government business at all. I mean, how much is an expensive picture in an office going to boost the productivity of a government minister or civil servants? Probably not that much. I think that is what's really going to stick in the throat for people.
It seems to me that what they need to do is reinstate the sort of the procedure of checking and accountability of these expenses that they had before the pandemic.
Yes, I think it's probably time now for a lot of the processes which were changed during the pandemic for good reasons. Things had to be done quickly, things had to be done differently, and at that extremely difficult time for the country, it's time to actually get back to normal. But the problem is, Rosie, is that actually it's not just during the pandemic. The spending has gone up 70% since 2010. That was 13 years ago. The pandemic was only from 2020 to 2021. So it appears that perhaps there's a whole different attitude that this Conservative administration has had towards government spending on government credit cards than the preceding Labour government did, because they actually brought in these cards in 1997.
Yes, also, The Guardian have given some other expenses. They say standards are not always so high depending on who's being catered for. When staff from Border Force were deployed to Glasgow Airport to manage the number of delegates turning up for COP, they were given £609 worth of sandwiches from Pret-a-Manger. So it wasn't always excessive.
No, not always excessive, but I suppose what the argument would be is that in an international outfacing department such as the Foreign Office, where if you are entertaining foreign dignitaries, if a Saudi dignitary entertains you in a certain place, you will have to match that. Whereas if it's an internal British matter, then you can look to save on areas there, because actually you're not looking to try and match the hospitality given by a foreign ally. You're just trying to manage money with an internal department. So that could explain the disparity between the Border Force, which of course is part of the Home Office, and the Foreign Office, where we see some of these very expensive expenses payments.
There's a different set of expectations that have to be managed, aren't there?
Precisely.
The Daily Telegraph say they have the details here of Ben Wallace, who wants to conduct a security review over Chinese spy balloons working with the US. I mean, there's sort of increasing fears over the threat to the West from China, aren't there? Because, this is, I think, the fourth balloon in 2 weeks that we've had to get rid of.
Yes, so this is the fourth balloon. I think a fourth balloon has been shot down in just over a week in North America. This is not really something which we have been talking about at all within British news until the past couple of weeks, as you mentioned earlier on. And what's been announced is that the UK are to launch a security review over these Chinese spy balloons. And Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, is going to be working with the US and other partners to analyse intelligence to assess the dangers posed by these balloons.
Let's talk about as well, if we can, the row between the Conservative government, Boris Johnson, and the head of the BBC. For anyone who's not familiar with the story, it's on the front page of many of the papers. The Guardian here has the BBC's chair position is increasingly untenable. Why so?
So the BBC chair, Richard Sharp, who is actually Rishi Sunak, the current Prime Minister's former boss, I believe, at Goldman Sachs. It all seems like a very nice club where everyone knows each other and gets nice jobs, perhaps in the BBC and in the government. But Richard Sharp has basically been under pressure since the Sunday Times revealed last month that he had essentially helped facilitate a loan to the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson by his distant cousin Sam Blythe over in Canada for £800,000, and there has been an investigation into this, and now he's facing calls to resign. There are two other separate investigations going on, one which is led by a KC, a lawyer called Adam Heppenstall, and another by the BBC itself to look into any conflicts of interest. But it's not looking very good for Richard Sharp. And of course, what Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, will say is, oh, well, we have to go through this due process and everyone is innocent until proven guilty. But ultimately, these are words that we've just heard too much recently with Partygate, with Nadine Zahawi recently. And Rishi Sunak really just needs to tap all of this on the head and get on with delivering his 5 priorities for the British people.
Said very eloquently. The problem is, you'd be listening to this saying, well, why is he failing to do that?
Well, because it's difficult, because these stories keep on popping up, and Rishi Sunak seems to want to do the good gentlemanly thing and allow due process to take course because he believes in natural justice, which is a very valiant and fair goal to have. But the point is, when it gets to a point where it's actually damaging to a government, where I think this actually is, it becomes difficult. And of course, this really has nothing to do with Rishi Sunak. This happened before Rishi Sunak was a Prime Minister. It wasn't Rishi Sunak's administration that appointed Richard Sharp to the position as BBC chair. So actually, I would probably argue that Rishi Sunak doesn't need to waste political capital on defending this man's position as chair of the BBC.
Albie, thank you so much. Can I just ask you finally, are you influenced by things you see online?
I probably am more influenced than I would like to give off by things that I see online. I bought this this earwax remover from an advert that I saw on YouTube. It's completely useless. It's called a twiddler. Don't buy it, Rosie. Don't buy it.
That sounds
a twiddler.
Terrible. I'm really sorry to hear you have a problem with earwax.
No, I don't. I don't have a problem with earwax. I was influenced.
How much was it?
I need one of these de-influencers to stop me from buying these things. It wasn't too much. It was only about £20.
£20 to solve a problem you didn't even have?
I know. They're very crafty, Rosie. They're very crafty. But that's why these de-influencers that the Times are talking about, I think 130 million views these de-influencers are getting on TikTok.
Yeah, they're telling people not to buy things.
Exactly, not to buy things, not to buy certain brands, notably by Kim Kardashian. I wish I'd seen one of these videos. Maybe I should get TikTok and follow them.
I see those adverts and I think, who is buying these things? Albie, it's you.
It's me.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for joining the programme. I'll be thinking of you and your finances and your judgment as well. Albie, political commentator and co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism. It has been a pleasure and very surprising.